Hello, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with RealityShifters.com, talking with you today about the idea that we don't all necessarily share the same physical world. And this topic came up in my recent presentation for the International Mandela Effect Conference in person in Connecticut, September 2023. And in that presentation, the editor of Conscious Life News, Ross Pittman, observed that there was one particular slide, one particular quote that really stood out for him. And it was that one of the weirdest, I'm going to read it out loud now. This is, speaking is Bernardo Kastrup. And his quote says, "One of the weirdest theoretical implications of quantum mechanics is that different observers can give different, though equally valid, accounts of the same sequence of events. As highlighted by physicist Carlo Rovelli in his relational quantum mechanics, this means that there should be no absolute observer-independent physical quantities. All physical quantities, the whole physical universe, must be relative to the observer. The notion that we all share the same physical environment must therefore be an illusion." Now, when I heard from the editor of Conscious Life News, that's Ross Pittman, he's the one that contacted me, he said that this really ties in closely with what he's been learning. It fits in as part of the Vedanta, where the idea is presented that we're each dreaming of our own unique and individual reality. Ross also shared this quote from Bashar: "Even though you may think, as we have said, that you are all sharing one particular reality, you are not. You are creating your own version, your own simulation through agreements, telepathically connected agreements with each other, to create what appears to be the same reality. But each of you is creating your own." This brings up, after that quote, it brings up the idea, what is the role of the observer? Now, this is a big deal in quantum physics because, as I like to consider, what if everything, absolutely everything, that's you, that's me, that's the plants, the trees, everything that we see is relative to the observer? What does that feel like? What does that look like? Can you imagine that? Because that's not what most of us are taught when we go to school. It's not what our families talk about. But we do see evidence that this is likely the case from experiments in quantum physics, such as the double slit experiment. And that's where the observer is watching that very simple, elegant apparatus. The most elegant experiment in all of science is what it's been called, not by me, but although I would agree with that, because basically it's so simple, there's hardly anything involved, just one photon emitter, that's a quantum particle, one going out at a time, that travels between two parallel slits and then ends up on a screen at the other side with the observer noticing what's happening. And then, of course, what happens with this experiment is inevitably the observer definitely plays a role in what's observed in a number of different ways. And there are so many different variations of this experiment, but the most simple, the most straightforward is just noticing that if you place an observational detection unit or measuring device inside one of the slits, then what you'll see is that you'll know which slit the particle went through, basically. So you'll know it's traveling like a particle of light, a quantum particle. Whereas if you put the detection device at the screen and you don't know which slit it went through, then the quantum photon particle is going to act like a wave. It's going to interfere with itself. And each time it lands on the screen, each single photon will be behaving as if it is interacting with a whole bunch of other photons, even though each one is going through one at a time. Okay, so this is kind of a big deal. We've heard about this before. We can also see this idea shining through with brilliant illumination in the Mandela Effect and reality shifts. And these are the same thing. Basically, reality shifts are the personal Mandela effects. Mandela effects are the collective reality shifts. Same exact thing. So this is happening almost as if the cosmos or God or creator longs for us to notice this essential detail. One thing that seems super significant about the Mandela effect in particular is that the way it works. In other words, people don't all notice the same changes at the same time, nor do they necessarily notice the same changes. So each person who's noticing a Mandela effect might notice it months, years later, than someone else. And that's part of this whole phenomenon. I can almost sense that these hints are being dropped by nature, by the cosmos, by the creator, every time I see something is different with a reality shift or a Mandela effect. To me, it feels like this kind of a gentle nudge, like, do you get it yet? Are you noticing? And it's dazzlingly amazing to me that this is happening, and that these entangled, interwoven, dynamically shifting realities are absolutely inviting each and every one of us to really envision who we'd like to be, who we can be. What are the possibilities when anything imaginable might be possible? So in my book, Reality Shifts, When Consciousness Changes the Physical World, I describe reality shifts that I've experienced that seem to happen for no apparent reason. It's like, what the heck is this? I also describe reality shifts that I noticed that correspond to wishes and prayers. I include reality shifts that result in the healing of things and people. And then I also include ways to allow reality shifts, to feel inspired, the whole interaction with reality shifts, and the fact that this is a dream. And like a dream, we can become lucid and wake up in the dream. So we can wake up, we can have lucid dreaming, lucid living. We can also have thoughtful contemplation about why and how reality shifts, and a sense of what it's like to live every day when we know it does. So when you experience the shifting nature of reality, you might find, like I have found, that life definitely does feel like a dream. Some people call it a simulation. That's the newfangled word for a very old idea. And much of what we call meaningful coincidence or synchronicity could be caused by a property of our minds to send and receive time waves, selecting a reality we choose to experience. So these are just some ideas, thought candy, if you will, to play with. Let's get to something that I've talked about in the last few years, because it's the most significant news item that I know of in the year 2019. Besides, that was the first year that I got together with the folks who formed the International Mandela Effect Conference. But my favorite story in the news from 2019 was a report of a physics experiment, and it challenges objective reality. And the researchers summed up the purpose and findings of their study, and I'm going to read to you what they said in the little preface summary of the whole thing. The scientific method relies on facts established through repeated measurements and agreed upon universally, independently of who observed them. In quantum mechanics, the objectivity of observations is not so clear. Most dramatically exposed in Eugene Wigner's seemingly different realities. The question whether those realities can be reconciled in an observer-independent way has long remained inaccessible to empirical investigation, until recent no-go theorems constructed an extended Wigner's friend scenario with 4 observers that allows us to put it to the test. In a state-of-the-art 6-photon experiment, we realized this extended Wigner's friend scenario, experimentally violating the associated Bell-type inequality by 5 standard deviations. In other words, you can't ignore the results here. That was my little interjection. If one holds fast to the assumptions of locality and free choice, this result implies that quantum theory should be interpreted in an observer-dependent way. Voila, ding, ding, ding. And there we have reality shifts, Mandela effects, each of us noticing in our own time whether or not we agree that a certain Mandela effect or reality shift occurred. Okay, so that summarizes this extraordinary experiment, which this is the Yeti Experiment that I frequently talk about. And it was a collaboration between the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, and Vienna, Austria. And if you want to look it up, I've got this on my blog post with the sources. That's Massimiliano Yeti with a whole bunch of other researchers, and it's called Experimental Test of Local Observer Independence. Okay, so that experiment is extraordinary. I think it's a watershed experiment. It's one of the first and most significant studies supporting what many of us have been witnessing with regard to reality shifts and Mandela effects for years. So in order to appreciate the significance of what this means and the findings from this experiment, we must reconsider our assumptions of what is objectivity. In other words, one reality, we all share it. You can run an experiment, you're going to get people agreeing that what happened happened at the same place and same time. That's not what they saw with this collaborative effort, by the way. They said different observational devices at the same place, same time, witnessing absolutely different results, different historical records and events occurring. And so perhaps the biggest possible concept to consider at this point is the notion that there is not necessarily any completely shared physical reality. Can you imagine such a thing? And what would it look like? So how would we envision a physical world in which there's never any completely shared physical reality? Well, one way to think of it is role-playing games. Just imagine that there's a game you can play, and in that game, you're playing with some other players who are sort of noticing perhaps similar events, but probably not entirely identical. Like what you're getting a very unique version of the game just for you. And even though some parts of the game include some shared events with other players, each choice a player makes leads to experiencing different sequences of events, and not necessarily the same sequences of events that other players are undergoing and noticing. This would closely parallel what many of us are witnessing with the Mandela Effect and with reality shifts, where we now remember something differently than what the official history represents. And I'm not saying it's misremembering, because that's a huge assumption to state that, and it's actually a sort of a logical fallacy and error to do so when we're investigating the whole phenomenon. So in a world with no guarantee of shared physical reality, probably you'd be noticing that some events that you remember are recalled differently by your friends, your family, neighbors, colleagues, coworkers, that sort of thing. Maybe they remember that you said something differently or did something differently than what you remember. It might be kind of weird to hear about it, and it might be a little strange. You might argue and say, that's not what happened. Or maybe you'll just want to listen to what do they remember so clearly. They really are convinced about this whole thing. I suggest there can be great positivity and great opportunity in a reality based more on subjective rather than objective experience. This is something I feel strongly about. I co-authored a paper with physicist George Weissman, and it's called The Quantum Paradigm and Challenging the Objectivity Assumption. I'm just going to read a short section from our introduction to that paper. It really sums up what we're saying. We say anonymous phenomena such as ESP and psychokinesis, collective consciousness, and synchronicity that are considered impossible in the context of the classical paradigm fit naturally in and can in turn provide evidence for the quantum paradigm. Spirituality and science are shown to be complementary approaches, referring to the same reality, mind, while each discipline retains its integrity. The quantum paradigm can be intellectually comprehended as well as embodied. One can live in quantum reality. A good metaphor for this is life as a dream, with no quote-unquote real objects as distinguished from experienced objects. Experience is thus empty of self-nature in the Buddhist sense, with everything interconnected and codependently arising. Experiencing the world by embodying the quantum paradigm is transformative, healing, and an antidote to alienation resulting from embodying the classical paradigm. Embodying the quantum paradigm and living in the oneness of all creation can help humanity, increasingly lost in the materialism and individualism reinforced by our embodiment of the classical paradigm, and restore intimate connection and harmony with spirit, nature, and fellow humans. We need such a transformation to survive and thrive in our technological society. So that's me, and that's George Weissman. That's our co-authored paper. And that's kicking it off, really getting it going. And you can see that on my website. I've got a copy of it there. One way to help ensure that you explore these more enjoyable possible realities is to engage in this participatory universe by remembering the power of the questions that you're asking with your thoughts, with your feelings, in your heart, in your soul. When you feel a question that strongly, that is a question. You are inviting the cosmos to answer it. When you say it out loud, that strengthens it. But there can be advantage to asking questions that you really truly wish to live the answer to. That would be such as, how good can it get? And adding that to anything else that you're thinking about. Just adding those 5 words to whatever you're contemplating can be enough to invite more positivity into your experiences in the world. So This is my take on what's going on with this idea that we could be living in completely different physical realities. I'd say, yes, that matches what we're observing, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too. And of course, you know what I'm going to say next. Let's consider this idea in addition to the idea of how good can it get when we consider maybe reality is not as purely objective as it seems. It may seem that way. But what if each and every one of us is living in a completely different world? It's kind of like a dream world in a sense, and it means reality it also is a dream. How does that feel to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you could leave a comment if you get a chance. Until next time, this is Cynthia Sue Larson with Reality Shifters, asking you to keep asking my favorite question: how good can it get? Love you. Bye.